there's been a couple of things in the news this week that I want to make sure that you didn't miss. And it is, this audience is never going to be surprised by what's coming and what is happening, because we are over the horizon. It has been my job to tell you what's really going on and show you what is coming for almost 20 years now. And I mean, if you look at our record, you will see how right we have been for so long, way ahead of the curve. We are now still ahead of the curve, and I want to give you a couple of examples. This came out from The Nation this week. Homeland Security is quietly tying Antifa to foreign powers. The Department of Homeland Security, DHS intelligence officials are targeting activists it considers Antifa and attempting to tie them to a foreign power, according to a DHS intelligence report obtained exclusively by The Nation. Now, this just came out. The intelligence report, titled "The Syrian Conflict and Its Nexus to the U.S.-Based Anti-Fascist Movement," mentions several Americans, including the left-wing podcast host, who traveled to Syria to fight ISIS. The report includes a readout of these individuals' personal information, including social security numbers, blah, 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 blah. Dated July 14th, the document, marked for official use only and law enforcement sensitive, draws on a blend of publicly available information and state and federal law enforcement intelligence. They're targeting Americans like they're Al-Qaeda, says a former senior DHS intelligence officer with knowledge of the operations. Okay, so now The Nation found this out, and they're trying to excuse it and say that it's all trumped up. I want you to know this just came out this week. If you were a Blaze subscriber and you watched our program on June 10th, remember, this DHS memo came out July 14th. A month before that memo, our team had already put all of this information together and given it to you. We are way ahead, and we do it because the times require it. And you need to know the truth on what's really going on. And I feel many times we're the only ones that are really covering these things in depth and tying all of the dots together. Listen to this clip from June 10th. They are called the Revolutionary Abolitionist Movement. This is a shadowy, radical left group looking to direct all others towards a model patterned after what they've done in the past. Patterned, believe it or not, after the Marxist Kurds in Northern Syria. We have heard a lot of talk from a lot of politicians. Oh, we got to save the Kurds. We got to save the Kurds. No, the Iraqi Kurds are good. The Syrian Kurds, as you have heard on this program over and over, are people that took territory from Syria through an armed revolt and established a Marxist state. They were not on our side. Now they're trying to overthrow us. They even wrote a version of something similar to the coming insurrection. I want to show it to you. You can get this now off of Amazon as well. It's called "Burn Down the American Plantation." They specifically mention the Marxist Kurd revolution and how it, and I quote, charts out an insurgent direction for anarchists organizing today. The guy who is my chief researcher, Jason Buttrill, is with us now. Jason, quite amazing that this is now coming out in The Nation. And the left is responding to this in the exact opposite way that we did. But you have confirmation now that what we outlined is exactly right, is what is happening in the world.
I just want to thank the mainstream media for finally catching up 2 months later. That's awesome. That's great.
But they didn't. It wasn't the mainstream media. It was The Nation. It was The Nation that broke that story.
Well, it shows the absolute incompetence, either that or something even more nefarious of the people out there that we have traditionally expected to get our news from. We were first put onto this because we saw them talking online through online channels. Eventually, we saw them popping up at all of these violent protests, and they were primarily handing out food. Does that sound familiar? They were handing out food, handing out water, stuff like that. But on the back channels, they were also saying time to escalate, quote unquote. They were coordinating a bunch of these rallies, and they seemed to be like almost trying to form themselves into an umbrella organization. Well, we looked into them more, and yes, they have patterned their movement off of the Marxist Kurds in Northern Syria. And I think it's important for us to clarify, because I think a lot of the audience may be a little confused when we say because we've said support the Kurds, but you have to make a distinction. There are vast differences between the Kurds in northern Iraq and the Kurds in northern Syria. Their languages are completely different. Their ideologies are completely different. They are Marxists. They have used terrorism. And yes, we have used them as allies to help defeat Syria, which further, to defeat ISIS. But that makes this more complicated. But I've spoken to them on the Iraqi-Syrian border. They are Marxists. They will use terror. And the way that they were able to form their own nation for a short time was by making autonomous zones. Again, the same thing that Antifa and these groups are trying to do here. They want to make small autonomous zones and then build upon that to where eventually they splinter off and break apart. They've written a book on this.
And as we've pointed out, these guys have traveled. There have been members of the left that have traveled to meet with them and to gain an education from them.
Yeah, to Terror 101 is what you would call that.
Right.
It's so much more than just protests. It's so much more than that. It's so much more than riots. There's a specific plan behind all this, and it's a violent plan, which makes it even more ridiculous. In the Senate hearing this week, you couldn't even have Senate Democrats even say that what Antifa is doing is bad. They couldn't even just say that the rioting is bad. Well, if you can't say that, then you can't look at what the underlying ideology is. It's incredible. So
there was another story that broke this weekend that, again, mainstream media is now on, but they're not explaining it. In fact, they tried to tie it into a conspiracy theory. I saw a couple of lines in the stories that made me believe that the mainstream media is still covering on what this really means. But we did a special, the last one on the Kurds was June 10th. I urge you to watch it. It was Insurrection USA is the name of that. You can find it on the Blaze. But the one we did on the money laundering in Ukraine of Kolomoisky, what episode was that? Do you remember, Jason?
That was called The Final Piece, with this character you're about to talk about being the final. This was back in February.
Unbelievable. So in February, we put together the final piece of the puzzle on what was really happening in Ukraine, and we said the figure that is really at the center of this is Kolomoisky. He's a really bad guy. He's the Tony Soprano, if you will, of Ukraine. And we told you that he was laundering money, and it's our money. It was U.S. aid money. And we said at the time, the only way you can figure this out is if the Treasury starts to track this money. But we showed evidence that it was coming back into the United States. We didn't know what was happening to the money, but we showed you enough evidence to lead a reasonable person to believe that U.S. aid money went to Kolomoisky. He then laundered that money and then invested it here in the United States. We asked who was responsible for helping. How did that possibly happen? Well, those questions yet are unanswered, but we now know where some of the money went, and it was in Ohio, in Cleveland, Ohio.
Cleveland and Miami raids went down this week. I cannot believe it has taken this long. You said in that show that this was key to finding out where this money went. So we're talking about $1.8 billion. $1.8 billion. That could finance a small war, which, if you've watched the show, that might have actually happened in eastern Ukraine.
Yeah, we allege that it did.
But that money went to Privatbank. That's Kolomoisky's bank. It was later nationalized after they found out that all this money was mysteriously going missing. But it went through a bank in Cyprus, then poof, it went laundered all over the world. Now, we said, because we also showed in one of the previous shows, that there were wire transfers that were going from Burisma, which Kolomoisky is the managing principal of. When money transfers were going from Burisma to Hunter Biden. So
through Cyprus.
Through Cyprus. Where the heck did this money come? If you can find out the full trail, which it sounds like finally U.S. prosecutors are, because remember before they wouldn't look at it, they wouldn't accept the information. It got stuck in some what was it, an attorney in New York? It just got stuck there.
Yep.
Well, I guess it's pretty obvious, Glenn. Now we know that they got the information. They're following that money trail. If you can follow it to Cleveland, I kind of think you might be able to follow it to Hunter Biden. It's just a guess.
What's amazing is that dirty money that had been laundered with, I believe, Hunter Biden as part of this. It was money that was stolen from the American people. That's right. It was then laundered through a bank in Burisma and through Biden, I believe, and then shipped offshore through Cyprus and then lost. We now know that, 4 of the largest skyscrapers or towers in Cleveland are owned, and it was with that laundered money that it was purchased by Kolomoisky.
Yeah.
How is that? You're investing in buildings in Cleveland, Ohio? Really?
That's how, and we pointed this out in the show. That's how these guys, these money launderers, steal their money, and that's how they hide it. Because once it goes to a country, it usually goes to like a construction company, and it'll stay there for a while. It'll move on to some other location, and they'll change their name and change the. So my thought is it probably went to some of these. I'm just guessing here, but they probably went to these construction companies or these large building companies or whatever, and then it then went through another layer of laundering to where it then might have probably went somewhere else. Eventually, all roads lead back to Kolomoisky and his people. But that's why this is so hard to track the full trail, of where this money goes. But that's why it's so important, because if we can identify that, we might actually put an actual receipt to some of these funds that we have questions about, like the transfers to Hunter Biden.
Yeah, $1.8 billion that just vanished of your money has now been found. At least part of it has been found in Miami and in Cleveland. And at one point, I think Kolomoisky was the biggest landlord for large buildings in downtown Cleveland, which I don't know if it's still going on or not, but that's your money, America. And no one is giving you any perspective, because it all goes back to Burisma and Joe Biden and his son, Hunter.